Welcome to Chai with Manjula. Over 3 billion people, which is half of the world, live on just $2.50 a day. According to UNICEF, 22,000 children die each day due to poverty. And they die quietly in some of the poorest villages on earth. For some, poverty exists in a separate world, but for far too many, poverty is an unavoidable reality. Those who have the means can and do reach across to help, but sending aid is not enough unless it also empowers communities. So the right approach is critical to addressing the social divide. My guests today are Rajaswini Bhansali and Rajiv Khanna from a San Francisco-based organization called International Development Exchange, or IDEX. Since 1985, IDEX has been engaged in fighting poverty around the world. They will tell us about the approach that IDEX has found extremely effective, an approach that donors will also find rewarding. Rajaswini is the Executive Director of IDEX and Rajiv is the Learning and Evaluation Manager. Rajaswini and Rajiv, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Manjula.
Pleasure is all ours.
Well, poverty is a major threat to the world today, and it is such a complex and deep-rooted problem that most of us can't even comprehend the impact it has and the challenges that come with it. So first, give us a sense of what poverty means in 21st century. How do you define poverty in today's world?
Yes. Well, Manjula ji, over 1 billion people continue to live without meeting their basic needs, without adequate shelter, food, health, water, education for their children. At a very fundamental level, poverty is what we all assume it to be, which is that kind of basic economic deprivation. But increasingly, we're also learning to understand poverty as a lack of conditions that leads to people's social, cultural, and ecological well-being and balance.
I think one of the most startling figures for me, Manjula ji, is that there's about 2.3 billion children in the world, and about 1 billion of them, so almost half of the children in this world, don't have access to education. Oh. So that's almost 1 in 2. That's really an alarming amount. As we enter the 21st century, about close to 1/6 of humanity, just a little over 1 billion people, do not know how to read and write. And I can guarantee you that in that billion people, about 55 to 60% of them are women. So that's another really shocking figure as well. Then we have water. Water is really the key, the essence of life. And you can say that almost more than 3 billion people in the world, so half the population of this entire world does not have access to clean water or sanitation.
Okay.
And that, of course, raises a whole another set of issues, because if you do not have water, then there's the health is an issue, and the education, well-being, your livelihoods are affected because agriculture is affected, and so forth. So just not having water leads to a chain reaction.
Okay, and it's mostly in developing countries, or even the rich countries have pockets of poverty?
Sure. Most of these figures are around sub-Saharan Africa as well as in South Asia. So in South Asia, if you collectively include all the countries in South Asia, the 7 countries that form the SAAC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, you'll see that the figures for lack of access to water, child mortality, for instance, you'll see education levels, for instance, lack of housing, especially in urban areas, you'll find them actually much more higher than in sub-Saharan Africa.
I see.
And in sub-Saharan Africa also there is a serious problem with some of these issues in water and HIV/AIDS, but rapidly even India is gaining on the HIV/AIDS afflicted population.
I see. Now there are countless organizations around the world who are actively engaged and doing incredible work of eradicating poverty and making a big impact, I'm sure. But as a result, is the gap narrowing? Are we bridging the social divide?
Yeah, you know, it's in addition to incredible organizations working on the issue, it's now been 60 years since the UN Declaration on the Universal Rights of Human Rights was passed. It's the Millennium Development Goals aim to have poverty by 2015, and yet we see that in fact, even as the developing economies are growing, we're seeing increasing inequity. We're seeing a growing wealth gap. We're seeing that the disparity between those who have and those who don't have, between the elites and the people living in dire circumstances, between the urban, between the rural, between women and men. You know, these inequities continue to grow, and in fact, in many cases, we've seen in the last 2 decades that many such things have been exacerbated because of climate change, because of political collapse, war, and violence against women, violence against children. And so unfortunately, there isn't the best news in terms of the poverty trends overall in the world because of the root causes of poverty, which we understand as disadvantage, injustice, and inequity.
There are so many causes and they are all interlinked, and what happens is the solutions, I think, seem to be as complicated as the problem itself.
Exactly.
So in terms of solutions, what approaches have actually worked and what are not so effective? Tell us about that, because even our audience, our donors would like to know when they're sending aid, what should they look for in an initiative?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from IDEX's experience of the last 27 years of working on this issue. And we still like to think of ourselves as a learning organization. So I'm not going to share any maxims or dictates that are conclusive for everyone's experience.
You've been around since 85.
Yeah, but there are some lessons we've learned. And what we've learned is that a lot of large-scale development aid doesn't always get to the people that are most affected by oppression and injustice and by the root causes of poverty. We often notice that in spite of our well-meaning efforts, often people who are most marginalized don't get to feel like they own the ways in which change is going to happen. We found that some of the most effective solutions are those that actually build the power and agency of the people that are themselves poor, and that celebrate also the resilience that exists in their communities and builds off of that to create solutions that last over a long time. Sometimes, you know, our partners in Nepal jokingly call development organizations come and go. The come and go organizations. You know, we have a great grand idea. We come in all guns blaze and then suddenly we are gone in 2 years. As if these root cause problems could be solved in 2 or 3 years. One must be willing to stick it in the long haul. And the second lesson is that we must work alongside people.
And one of the other lessons that we have learned as well in our 27 plus years of existence is that impoverished communities are not poor. There is a difference. So they are impoverished because they may lack access to economic means, they may lack access to social, political, cultural rights, they may not have control over natural resources around them, and that could be because of government policy or some other historical or geographical or other ecologically related issue. Those are impoverished communities, but they're certainly not poor. They have skills.
Impoverished communities
are not poor.
Not necessarily poor.
Absolutely, and they're not poor because they have the wisdom. They have the knowledge, they have the resilience above all, they have the strength, and they have the strength to adapt and change and form their own solutions. So they are very they are resource rich, they are skill rich.
Resource, but they need opportunities.
Absolutely. You know, it's not just defined by wealth, right? Poverty is not just defined by
lack of opportunity and the right environment.
So they're not poor,
This is the developing world. You heard the story before. Plagued by weak economies, environmental degradation, and gender inequity. For decades, there's been one main strategy: throw money at it. And that's what everyone did for years and years. However, there was a big problem with this. The policy to send in so-called experts and tell local people what is best? Not effective, not empowering, not the wisest use of money. Groups on the front lines, those with the know-how of what the true needs and solutions were, didn't have access to these funds, and those with the funds didn't have access to reliable grassroots organizations. So in 1985, a group of former Peace Corps volunteers got together and did something about it. It's not about aid or charity. It's not about a silver bullet. It's about investing in visionary leaders and organizations working alongside their own communities. A surprisingly uncommon approach that has proven both effective and powerful at addressing not just the symptoms of poverty, but its very roots. Freeing up our partners to work with communities to build local economies, empower women, and fight for social and environmental justice. Like Nepi Benya. Indigenous women artisans formed a cooperative to make and sell their products all made with sustainable natural resources like agave. women are now saving the income being generated through their work, loaning it to each other, and reinvesting it so that their cooperative can reach new heights. They're tackling climate change head-on, growing food gardens and harvesting rainwater and teaching other women to do the same. Women are empowering women through community workshops, learning business skills, and supporting each other as they become decision makers and leaders. This isn't aid. It's a targeted, solution-driven investment that puts power back in the hands of the people. This year, we're partnering with 25 other grassroots organizations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Where do you fit in? International Development Exchange is just that, an exchange that connects you to innovative grassroots groups implementing high-impact, low-cost solutions to poverty. IDEX channels individual giving into grants that nurture existing projects with a proven track record, sowing the seeds of justice and sustainability from the ground up. The time is now. The need has never been more urgent, and the opportunity has never been greater for all of us to make a difference. And you have a critical role to play.
Currently, we're active in India and Nepal, in Guatemala, Mexico, Zimbabwe, and South Africa.
Okay.
And we take this long-term view, this long-term partnership approach. The idea is that the trajectory of social change is not linear or straightforward.
Right.
Sometimes organizations develop, sometimes they have to adapt to the changes in their own circumstances. Sometimes they learn to collaborate with others and go from being singular organizations to being really active networks. And IDEX has always been innovative in thinking that that's okay. Actually, all organizations should adapt to the reality on the ground and to the context. Ultimately, we're about the impact and the kind of lasting impact rather than counting the inputs only. And so we stay in the long term with our partners, which means we make a minimum commitment of 3 to 6 years. And after that time, every 3 years, we go through a pretty rigorous evaluation process. It's a partnership of mutuality. We bring to the table resources and connections to philanthropy in the US. Our partners bring to the table a lot of great learning, some innovative new models that have been tried and tested that others can learn from. And so that mutuality is very important. It's not a traditional grantor-grantee relationship where one controls all the power and the purse strings and the other one is simply the recipient. In this, the relationship is quite lateral. Our partners are constantly offering feedback. They are knowledge partners to us. They're part of coming up with the criteria.
Tell us about the impact you have seen over the years and what an empowered community looks like after you are done working there 3 to 6 years. Give us some examples.
Yeah, so many examples to pick from.
Sure.
One of the examples that has really been staying with me because it's actually an example about what it means to do good risk-taking philanthropy and how you can sometimes transform perceived failure into actually lasting innovation is this indigenous women's group that we've been supporting in Guatemala called AFEDES. We're entering almost our, I think, 8th or 9th year of partnership now.
What is it called?
AFEDES. And if you go to the IDEX website, idex.org, you can learn all about this group and the many groups that we support around the world. But AFEDES in particular is led by young indigenous women in a part of Guatemala that's mostly Maya, Kakchel. And as you know, historically, parts of Mesoamerica, the indigenous women have been most oppressed and often have not been allowed to lead any organizations. So first of all, the fact that this organization exists and that IDEX took the effort to go find it, to resource it, is one part of the story.
And women are always at the center of solutions.
Absolutely.
Poverty, whether illiteracy, growth, overgrowth, or disease, or
always.
Yeah, always. So.
And often not recognized as leaders.
Right,
you know,
right.
You will often find them as workers, but not necessarily as leaders in their community.
Empowering women is the key. So.
It's very key. And so this group had a very successful microcredit program. They were helping local women take out small credits and use the loans to build their businesses. In some cases, especially since formal employment rates are so low, that this informal economy was being sustained by this microcredit program. But something very interesting happened. the group did this process of reflection where they realized that even though they had ran a very successful program and that the repayment rates on their loans was very high, savings appeared to be rising, they noticed something. They noticed that the nutritional levels in the community were very low, that more and more women were complaining about domestic violence, and in fact, women didn't act as if they were more empowered, even though they had economic power. So Feathers did what is very typical of IDEX partners, because their accountability is not just to their donor but to their entire community. They decided to do this process where they invited everyone to comment on what was working and what wasn't working. And in that process they learned that often women were coming in to take these microcredits because of pressures from their father or their husband or sometimes even their sons, that they didn't actually exercise any decision-making authority over the money they were bringing home. So Feathers decided, look, we're not addressing the root cause of problems. We are only perhaps even adding to the problem. So in addition to doing this economic empowerment work, they started a school for women's education to help women become decision maker. This training program does not just work with women and their critical thinking, it also involves men. In supporting men, especially young men.
Men have to be educated.
Absolutely, in learning how to support their wives, their mothers, their daughters, their sisters.
Their outlook has to change too.
Exactly, and one of the things their leader said to me that I find extremely inspiring is she said, you know, we realized quickly that we were solving the economic problem, but we weren't looking at how do we change the system that perpetuates this kind of discrimination, this kind of violence against women. We decided if we're going to be a true community-based organization that's accountable to changing our society, we have to address all these institutions, all these systems, and begin to change them together with our brothers and fathers and sons. And 10 years later, they've been extremely successful. Many of the women from this program have gone on to become policymakers. They have joined.
Gratifying that must
It's amazing, yeah.
Right. And what size grants do you typically give? Real quick.
Our grant sizes are between $10,000 to $20,000.
Okay. And if somebody wants to donate, what typically is a good size donation, or what minimum can you?
There is no minimum. Every dollar matters, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
$10, $20, $50
We take
donations?
everything from $1 to $100,000.
Donate online?
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful.
We welcome that warmly. In fact, IDEX's entire work is powered and fueled by individual donors, and we appreciate that so much because it's real solidarity in action.
That sounds like a great model.
And you know, I want to bring Manjula, my recently completed learning and evaluation report into the mix here as well, because this is also a little bit different from what we've seen in other organizations. For instance, other organizations may evaluate the impact of their grants to the partners on the ground, but what we did was we turned it around again. We asked our partners to evaluate us as a funder.
Okay.
So once again, we turned it flip upside down.
All right.
And some of the results were really gratifying for us, and an extremely important learning tool for us as well.
Okay.
We had about 88%, Vinny. 88% of community partners with whom we stand reported meeting almost all, half or at least all of their goals in our partnership cycle with them.
Okay, so they are gauging your performance.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful.
And I think about 75% reported stronger links to local and regional and international peer organizations.
Also, Rajaswini, you were in India recently.
I
You attended
was.
the Philanthropy Forum there, the India Philanthropy Forum.
Yes.
So tell us about the state of philanthropy in India, because traditionally in India we gave to our families, our immediate community, or to temples, not really to causes, something that we can touch and feel, we could give there. So is that changing in any way now?
It is changing in very big ways.
Okay.
I think that sense of touching and feeling and being a part of something is still important
Right.
as a value base, I think, for a lot of people in India. But I was profoundly inspired to see how thoughtfully and deliberately people are looking to find civil society groups that are effective, that are impactful, and how empowered some of our social sector leaders who have long been hidden away, nobody heard from, it was an invisible sector, how visible they're getting and how much due respect they're getting as well. And I was inspired to see many people like me who have effectively moved from India to the US and other countries and are connected in a very deep way to India, to alleviating poverty and injustice in India, and reconnecting philanthropically.
Let's talk about the Indo-American philanthropy. The Indo-Americans, all of a sudden, they are getting involved. It's amazing, in the last 50 years, they came here, they struggled, they survived, they succeeded, and now they're even giving back.
Exactly.
In such a short span, and it will be an important legacy of this generation.
Oh, absolutely.
So what is the status of the Indo-American philanthropy, and are we in the right direction? Tell us something about that. And also tell us, how can IDEX come into play here?
Yeah,
what
great question.
Can IDEX play as a resource connector
Absolutely.
within the Indo-American philanthropy?
Sure. So I think the trends are very positive. And I think in the last few years, we've seen about $2.5 billion go from overseas Indians into philanthropy in India. And of that, the 2.7 million Indian Americans in the United States have contributed about $750 million annually towards giving in India. And this is separate from remittances.
Yeah. And not only in India, they are also giving back here to
Absolutely.
local communities, to their
Absolutely.
universities and
Absolutely.
causes and disasters.
Absolutely. And that is incredible, because that's what we're about. We're about building community.
Right.
And that is a venture that we should follow throughout the world, right? So I think the trends are excellent. I think that the Indian diaspora over here is so dynamic and inspirational and entrepreneurial, and has had such an incredible success stories,
Especially in the valley.
Absolutely,
Exactly.
especially right here. And I think that they are using those learnings, and they're moving towards impactful and long-term philanthropy in India as well.
I see.
And where we come in, where IDEX comes in, is we can bring our lessons. We've learned some very important lessons about building community, about connecting community organizations globally. We've learned our lessons about holistic solutions to poverty. It's not just about water, education. It turns out it's about all of them and then some, right? So we can share those lessons with the diaspora, and we can connect donors to communities.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, first thing I'd say is thank you to you and to people like you who have been leaders in helping really shine the light on the giving that goes on in the diasporic community.
You guys are the light. I'm just reflecting it. You are the ones doing the work.
The second thing that comes to mind is, one of our long-term diaspora donors, Anil Lal, often says that what attracted him to IDEX was not just our approach and the impact of our dollars and knowing that it's getting to the right hands, but it's also the way in which we treat our donors. They're truly partners in this work with us. We are simply a vehicle. We are simply a resource that's connected to civil society organizations, and we will never oversell the work we do. We bring the truth to our donors, and we try to share our best practices, our learnings, what's working, what's not working, the contextual knowledge. We never work with just one or two groups in isolation. Before we fund any group, we do a whole mapping and study and relationship building. And there's nothing that replaces the integrity of a relationship, that trust you build both on the ground and through your credibility and track record, but the trust you build with your donors. And I think that's why we've had people who've kept their investments with us for the long haul, is because they know that money is being well stewarded. But it's not just the money. It's also the skills, the knowledge, the care, the connection, that sense of being part of a larger community.
Absolutely, and we would really like to invite the Indian diaspora over here, because we believe we have a lot to learn from them. You know?
Go ahead and share your message. What would you like to say to our viewers?
Well, I think I would like to invite your viewers to join us, to join forces with us. Like I said before, all of our work is powered by the courage, humility, and resilience of people we learn from on the ground, but they need all of us with our privilege, with our access in the United States to create new opportunities and new relationships that help their work go even further. And that's a role that many of us anyway play in our lives. I think IDEX offers another forum to get involved strategically. We have great social media presence. We have a young professionals group that Rajiv can say a few words about. Our website, idex.org, shares regular events that are coming up. June 7th is our annual event. We invite everyone. You'll get to hear from Latin American, African, Asian, and US-based food justice activists, and I'll be moderating a conversation on what does giving to food security really mean and what are the many ways in which we can do that.
And then we also plan in the fall to have a diaspora philanthropy forum as well.
That'd be very interesting.
So
And you will be a speaker.
Absolutely. You would be definitely a key invitee, and we invite the diaspora to come to join our community. It's and share your lessons with us, build alliances, attend our events.
Wonderful idea.
Absolutely,
Yes.
there's no doubt. I mean, we cannot survive without the community.
Right. I can see the passion in both of you for the work that you are doing. You're living in a beautiful world of caring and sharing.
Thank you so much.
So, of course, there is misery and poverty and suffering, but it's also people helping people.
Absolutely.
It makes it beautiful. So, on that note, is there any quote that you would like to share with us before we go?
I would. One of the quotes that has really resonated for me comes from Eduardo Galeano, a Latin American activist and leader. And he recently wrote this wonderful quote that I'd love to share. He said, I don't believe in charity. I believe in solidarity. Charity is so vertical, it goes from top to bottom. Solidarity is horizontal. It respects the other person. I believe I have a lot to learn from others.
That's beautiful. Solidarity, not charity.
Solidarity,
That's a
not
great
charity.
message.
Yes.
Thank you, Rajaswini and Rajiv, for joining us and for the wonderful work that you are doing.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you so
your
much,
support.
Manjula. Thank you very much.
That's all we have for you today. To learn more about IDEX and its work to end global poverty, you may go to their website, idex.org, which is IDEX.org. And to watch this show again, go to chaivithmanjula.org or find us on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll be back with another inspiring story about giving and people making a difference. For Chai with Manjula, I'm Manjula Gupta. See you next time.